Let's talk about what it would take to make 1600. If you've been following these videos, you'll know that I've said that to achieve a rating of 1000, the most important thing is to mention the dimension of material, not giving away stuff, and that the journey between 1000 and 2300 is characterized by the need to not lose time, tempo. And we will certainly see some of that second dimension here with time. But what I'm going to stress is, especially beginning now, that applies also before, it's really important to become clear in your thinking process. And we're going to talk a little bit more with some concrete examples a little bit later on. But what I really want to stress is that the path to gaining that clarity is going over your games. And that is really the heart of our training program at the dojo. Okay, so first things first, let's take a look at the ratings real quick here. And as you see, 1500, 1600, we are talking about a FIDE rating, so USCF 1650, and ChessCom and Lichess inflated above that. And then we look at our scoreboard, and we have nobody finishing the Polgar Mate in Twos. Today we're going to be talking about Chris Koski, like myself, an older dude trying to improve, and he has been working hard in the Mate in Twos, but you see he has not done them yet. Puzzle rush, survival, sparring positions, endgames. We're going to talk a little bit more about the rook endgame progression in a later video. Classic games, we're going to talk about classic games today a little bit, but what I'm going to focus on, of course, is the classical games and postmortems, right? And how that is to be used to get you as clear as possible in your thinking. You'll never be totally clear in your thinking. You'll always make mistakes, but we're going to talk about how this will help you, this being the process of going over your games. Okay, so here we are, and this is Chris's game here. By the way, he does an interesting thing where he publishes his games in a blog in addition to putting it into our database. And I'll link to the blog in the YouTube description. And what I want to stress is the beauty, if you will, of writing your games as if they were going to be published is you are forced to articulate your thoughts in a way that they will be understood by other people. Now, for this game, I'm going to just focus on a couple of moments. So we get this Ruy Lopez, and Chris has been playing this for a while. Okay, now let's talk about this. One of the things that's really important for playing this kind of closed maneuvering position is having a very deep sensitivity to the good pieces and the bad pieces. Okay, so right away what we should say is that the move c3 is designed not only to give this bishop a square back, but to undevelop this knight. So it's we need to have an eye on where this knight goes and trying to keep control of him. All right, so that's number one. We'll talk about some other pieces in a second. All right, fine. Bishop b7. Okay, now I want to stress that looks very natural, but it's important to see that if our pawn on e4 is a rock, then this bishop might regret being on this diagonal and might actually want to be over here. We'll talk about that more in a second. Fine. Rook d1. Okay, so this is one of the moments I want to spend a second on. When you go over a lot of classic games, which is something that we have in the program, you'll see that GMs in this position always put their rook on e1. And I recall vividly as a kid looking through Fischer games, and I was like, bro, why are you putting the rook on d1 or in a reverse position on d8? And it seems illogical, but if you understand that the strong point is e4, and that the tension of the position is flowing through that exchange e4, d5. Oh, then the rook goes to e1. It also gives a little bit more space to our pieces to do things maybe on the d1 square. So a minor detail, but going over classic games will give you a feel for like just saying, oh, yes, clearly the rook belongs there. Now, why do people intuitively think that the rook seems like it belongs on d1? Well, it looks like it's looking at the queen and such on d8. We will see later quickly that the rook would rather be on e1. But again, this isn't the biggest deal. Okay, I feel like black has played a totally fine game here, but he makes the first move that I'm a little suspicious of. To my mind, black should very quickly here play the move g6. And if we go back, let's just say to a very beginning position like here, we should say, oh, this is our problem piece. So in the same way, black needs to be sensitive to his knight on c6 being poor. Our knight on b1 needs to, we need to be sensitive. Both sides need to be sensitive about that piece. So white has invested a lot of time getting him over to g3. And black should say, hey, I'm not letting you in, buddy. No way. Now, one of the things that Chris notes here in his notes is that white should be aiming for a kingside attack. Why? Because the pawns are pointed that direction. And one of the things I know about Chris, I've done a lesson with him, is that he doesn't yet believe in the power of his play on the kingside. And so for the most part, it is a little bit abstract. You put the knight there on f5. Let's say black played rook c8, and you put it there. You don't know exactly how the attack's going to go, but that knight can't get kicked out so easily. We'll sink that thing on h6 if he kicks us now, and he's just annoying. Maybe next move we'll play bishop g5, maybe we'll play h3, g4, maybe we'll play knight g5. We have options. The knight's just beautiful on that square. And so one of the things I want to stress about time is that in an abstract sense, once we come out of the opening, it's not that abstract, but once we come out of the opening, time is really correlated to what we could call activity of the pieces. So black has a moment to shut my knight down on g3, at which point it really becomes a problem piece once again and needs to find its path to some other usefulness, right? So that is a way for like undeveloping my knight. But the second I get to f5, oh buddy, it's there for good. Okay, now something that happens here, the next couple of moves, is that Chris flails a little bit. And part of it is he doesn't yet know the power of his kingside play. Okay, and he plays bishop d2. There's a certain usefulness. It's talking to the knight. And let's say the obvious. The knight, when it went to c6 to a5, not entirely clear that it's so good on a5. And if it's going to be strong, it needs some kind of c4 break to bring the knight maybe to the c4 square. Okay, queen b6, bishop e3. Obviously, Chris has no idea what to do, no faith in his kingside play. So one of the things we're going to see going forward here is Chris is going to beat himself up a lot for his moves. And I want to stress that the key thing that he's going to need to get straight on is a couple psychological things and also just chess skills. First of all, faith in the white's ability that we can attack on the king's side. Number two, just kind of trusting in a sensitivity to the pieces. We see some notes in Chris's comments, but not that much about the individual pieces. For example, we need to start talking about this guy. Now, what's going to happen is black is going to play d4. It's very important to now say the structure of the position has radically changed. We now have a King's Indian structure, white now playing the King's Indian, and black's pawns are now clearly pointing this way. This bishop is now controversial because it's truly hitting a rock now. It was a little bit controversial to begin with. This knight, also no tension on the pawn. So d4, if it's going to work, he needs to blow us all the way open. Or else I don't know why he's doing it. Okay. Now, I'm going to address the a4 question in just a second. So bishop d2, and first let's look at his notes. cd, cd, bishop c1, and now black completely dominates the c file. It's kind of true, there's no doubt, but I want you to see, Chris, that this knight, terrible. This bishop, terrible. And so if this knight ever moves, well, then we're going to start thinking about our friend the bishop coming back to this beautiful diagonal. And so honestly, interesting position for white. We have everything to play for on the king side. That's our side of the board. And if I was going to be worried about something for white, it would be this move. That's the move I would worry about. And then on bishop d2 or something, I would worry about c4. Does it work? I don't even know. But that's what I would be worried about, right? With this here and potentially these pieces working. Maybe even some kind of knight d5 thing. But the cd4, no. Look at his pieces. They're terrible. Yes, he has the c file, and it's a little sad. But it's not the end of the world. Okay. So bishop d2, g6. Okay. A good move. But if we were to be afraid of something, it was c4. Okay. And now let's look at this. Chris is very critical of h4. And one of the crazy things about it is he is upset that later the pawn on h4 gets taken and he has some grief. However, that is not the fault of this move. I would like, personally, I think cd is still really interesting so that c4, you can figure out which way he's going to take back, for one. But let's say ideologically, h4 is fine. You want to play on the king side. And we're not afraid of h5 or anything like that. Okay, so that's our side of the board. Why are we allowed to make pawn weaknesses on our strong side? Because we have more stuff to fill any potential holes that happen. Our force count is higher over there on our strong side of the board. We do not want to be making weaknesses similarly on his strong side of the board, the queen side. Now, let's talk about this variation that Chris gives, a4 snip. Something I really want to stress is that in this position, BA is not the critical problem for us. And why is that? Because we have one truly terrible piece, and that's the bishop on c2. The second he takes this pawn, this bishop is now doing something. And at the very least, you have to say hallelujah or something when he achieves his freedom like this. He is so happy just to be doing something. So this is a key thing about analysis that I want to really stress. I think is a very instructive moment. When you're doing analysis, it's not going to be, first of all, not going to be like a white to move and win or black to move and win kind of question about what to do. But you want to frame your analysis based on the activity of the pieces and what we feel is going on in the position. So, for example, is there anything controversial with a4? Well, you are giving this knight a square. You know, that is something we have to worry about. So, and you are playing on his strong side of the board. So when you give him a square, well, maybe that's a little bit problematic. Now, you are threatening indirectly. It's not so indirect to play AB and pop this guy open. So there's a question. So black could consider rook A8. He could consider B4. Those would be the moves that I think would be the most interesting for the guy to pursue. Okay. By the way, here's a fun variation. B4, C4, B3, win a pawn, but at what cost? Well, black still gets this play, and you lost your good bishop. And I gave the variation primarily to show that, yes, white has a good bishop there. That's his good king's Indian bishop. And we do not want to give it away. So interesting position. And then in the analysis, we would ask ourselves, okay, well, what do we feel the evaluation is? Who's better here and why? These are the questions that are very valuable in the analysis. Okay, so I think h4 is fine. All right. And here, he is absolutely correct that this is a chess crime. So I disagree with a lot of Chris's annotations here, which is fine. But I do want to say, naming this move, knight h2, as a chess crime is super important. Super important. Because what it will do, hopefully for Chris in the future, is when he's about to do a chess crime, knight h2 going nowhere, that he will, in the future, have a little, something inside his head will prevent him from making a move like that. So what's the more natural move? Well, the first question's got to be knight g5. Why? That's our side of the board. Let's play knight g, stuff like knight g5, maybe queen f3. Let's go. Let's go hit this guy. Okay. Knight h2, bishop g7. Now, do I understand that move? I do not. For Black's point of view, he's thinking, oh, I put a pawn on g6, so I should put a bishop on g7. No, no, bro. Your bishop's looking over here. That's your strong side of the board. You need to be thinking about c4. It's time to roll this fool. Oh, Chris, I didn't mean to call you a fool, but I'm talking for Black's perspective, right? Okay, now nota bene, he's talking about a4, and again, ba4 is not the thing we should be worried about. That lets our bishop on c2, our terrible bishop, do something. As long as it does anything, we are happy. So bishop g7 makes no sense, and clearly bishop g5 makes no sense. Probably knight f3 or cd. And finally, Black plays c4. And nota bene, the bishop on d2 did have a role because it was talking to the not only the bad knight on a5, but the loose knight on a5. Something I want to stress about this c4 move is, from Black's perspective, what it does is it activates this diagonal. It activates the potential for this bad knight to come in, and potentially activates both of these pieces by removing b3. Nota bene with knight h2, some part of Chris's mind was like, let's play f4. Clearly not on the table, especially now that this queen is looking at the king. Okay, now I'm going to fast forward through this. Black got a very nice position, big positional advantage. And then, as often happens in situations like this, he blows it and allows bishop d8. Now, here's a key point. Chris gives a funky move mark to bishop d8 as if it could be controversial. And the reason he does so is later he regrets losing the dark squares and the h4 pawn. However, this is a great example of, it's like having a hangover, you know. You've been drinking the night before, and then you have all these bad feelings that carry on to the next day. And what are we talking about when I say that here? Well, Chris later loses the pawn on h4, comes into big trouble, finds himself in a lost position, and then ends up blaming bishop d8. Bishop d8, there's nothing wrong with bishop d8. There's nothing wrong with losing that bishop. Nothing at all. Now you're winning. Now you're winning. You're going to take that exchange. Thank you very much. Let's notice a couple things. This bishop, it's dead. It's dead. No one knows what it's doing there. Bishop, I don't know. Knight, I don't know. Right? You're doing great here. Okay. Bishop h6. And here's a very important point. Let's talk about time. Taking a pinned piece, as Chris does here, is a classic example of giving away time. Now, when in the previous videos we're talking about giving away time is usually in the opening. It's the easiest to understand of how people give away time. But this is a classic example where you have a pinned piece, and by taking it, you're just giving away time, because Black must, to free himself, do something like queen e6. Then we'll take. Then we'll take. We are in no hurry to take, though, until he unpins himself. Then we'll take the piece. Okay, so here we go. White is totally winning. And here we have a tactical mistake. Now, here's a thing about tactical mistakes I want to say. I have coached a lot of older guys. I've coached myself. And what you'll hear on the internets is that tactics is what you need to work on, and that's what's going to take you to the next level. Kind of true. I'm not going to argue but too much about it. But I want to stress that obviously, if you showed Chris this position, he would see bishop e4 in a heartbeat. If you said black to move and win a pawn, well, you would say, well, take this thing on e4. Okay. But the thing I'm going to say is that by going over your own games, you will be a little bit more wary of this kind of trick. And what I want to frame it as is that if you're sensitive to the bishop on b7, you recognize he's a kept criminal. He's in a cage over there on e4, right? He's not doing anything. Now, did we blow it a little bit in the sense that it's now difficult to defend h4? Yes, it's true. But notice that even if it's black's move, we're still winning the game because queen h4, we just play king g1. He's not doing anything, right? So we can do a variety of things, rook cd1. And if we want to go back, then we say, okay, queen f2 here or king g1. Or, excuse me, we've got to play queen f2. And then queen f6, king g1. So that would be an improvement. And then nota bene, in the annotations, we need to say that rook b3 is actually a mistake. Right? And notice the self-loathing. He says there doesn't seem any good way to avoid the coming onslaught. No! We'll just play queen f2, queen f6, king g1. Not working, not working. No compensation, beautiful file. Beautiful file. And as they say, with a knight on f1, you can't get mated. Right? That's what they told me. All right, so those are some of the key moments. And I want to stress that even here, I think he's winning. He's doing fine in any case. And yeah, there's like what should we call it? There's a remorse, a remorse that extends to after the game, where now he is truly in trouble, and all the pieces stopped working, and then he plays knight f5. But if we go back, it's not over even close yet in, say, this position where we blundered our dude, right? Okay, yeah. King g1 at any point would be a good building move so that we just make sure that queen h4 doesn't land with check. So this is a slightly complicated psychological path to 1600 as contrast to the other ones. But what I want to really stress is sometimes it's very helpful to have someone higher rated go over your game, to point out where you are hitting yourself over the head too much or inappropriately. And this happens to everyone. I know I do it myself as well. And the important thing is we want to be as objective as possible about the mistakes we've made. Only then will we go into the next battle clear-eyed about what we need to be thinking about. And one of the things I will tell you that the people who do not go over their own games, the trauma just sits there in their mind, kind of unresolved, and they too will be thinking to themselves, oh, I shouldn't take the rook for my bishop because later I lost this pawn and then I got traumatized. That's why we got to be as clear as possible. And I want to stress that it's a good sign that you are at a plateau in your chess development when you start beating yourself up unnecessarily. Okay? We will all get there. And the key for Chris and many others like him, myself included, is to go over the games, be clear about what the mistakes were, and realize we all are going to blunder pawns like bishop takes c4. That's going to happen to all of us. But to be then clear about not freaking out afterwards is going to be a key part of our chess progress. Okay. By the way, at any point here, c4 would have been a nice plan for white trying to bust out that rook on c1 because that rook needs to work for us. All right, everybody, I will talk to you next time when we talk about the road to 1700. Bye-bye.